So it's an important part of any party's platform, how much those promises they make will cost, especially as we head into the two leaders debates this week. So far, the Liberal Party is the only party to put out a platform with a largely costed out price tag. It includes how they plan to pay for all those promises. The NDP said today they think they'll have their costing out, quote, in the coming days. The Conservatives saying they're waiting on the Parliamentary Budget Office to calculate the price of the promises.
We would have an update from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. We will have that, I hope, shortly. And that was a process that Mr. Trudeau set up. We could not access the PBO until the campaign began. We will update Canada's recovery plan as soon as we get that confirmation.
Or he's going to magically get the budget back to balance. He's not showing his work. He's not doing his homework. And if you want to be taken seriously as a potential government, you have to be honest with Canadians.
Budget Office, which does all of that costing for the political parties, issued a rare statement of its own today, tweeting that as of August 15th, they've received 100 requests to cost electoral proposals and have returned 75 of them, and that they released the estimates on dates selected by the parties. Now, the reason this is important is it sort of suggests that there are some things that have been costed out for some parties that those parties have received back, but have not consented to be released publicly. What and which parties, we don't exactly know, though we do know that the Liberal platform is largely costed. Something for the primetime panel to talk about. Kathleen Monk, a political commentator in Ottawa. Also in Ottawa, Elliott Hughes, now with Summa Strategies, a former advisor to Ministers Sajjan and Morneau. In Vancouver, James Moore, a senior advisor at Dentons and a former Conservative cabinet minister. And Emily Nicolas, a columnist for Le Devoir. She is in Montreal. Emily, let me start with you. We will, I am sure, talk about why the costing has not yet been released publicly for some parties. But let me start. Do you think voters really vote on whether things are costed out?
I think the voters that are most likely to care are Conservative voters. And so this is why Justin Trudeau's attacking the Conservative leader or not having released the costs might actually work for the Conservative base if they're paying attention to that. And so I think that's why he's so vehement in attacking him, for example, and not necessarily insisting on Jagmeet Singh and the NDP too much. However, I do think that a lot of people are not as inclined to think about that now as they were maybe 2 or 3 years ago, given the context of the pandemic, given the context of an economic crisis. If now is not the time to spend more government money, I don't know when will. And so because of that, I think generally speaking, voters might be a little bit more lenient in terms of how much do promise cost. The one thing that perhaps doesn't forgive is more saying one thing and doing another. So I think people are more careful about just the general principle of honesty than they are about what the promises actually cost.
All right, let me go to James Moore next. James, the Conservative Party, one of those parties which has not released the full costing of its platform. Do you think that could potentially hurt Conservative voters in terms of their opinions about the Conservative Party and its platform?
Well, I think the party's answers on this suffice in the sense that they're going to surrender to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. By the way, that is the process that the media has largely fallen to. Since, frankly, Prime Minister Harper was in office, the Parliamentary Budget Officer is the office that has credibility. It's not unlike what happens in the United States with the offices that they have done there as well. The party could draw together, as we have in the past, I think it was 5 or 7 private sector economists who gave their views and accredited the platform in terms of scoring it. But the PBO is always what media goes to, and that is kind of the expected norm. It's a bit rich, however, for Justin Trudeau, who promised a balanced budget in 2 years, who has no balanced budgets in sight. And even though he's says now that this should be a ballot question, he himself has said, frankly, to his credit and in a sense of honesty, that he would, quote, do whatever is necessary, close quote, in terms of deficit spending in order to backstop any anxiety and pressures that public feels with regard to COVID-19. So this is all a bit of a phony war. To your question about does it impact voters? Yeah, I mean, people talk about the sort of the support that is out there for the People's Party, and it's not just anti-vaxxers and people who are out on the fringes. It's people who recognize that whether people care about it on election day or not, people will be forced to care about it and be sober about the reality of the scale of Canada's debt and what it means to the long-term burden for taxpayers. This is something that we cannot walk away from.
Okay, so James, if it is so important, then why even wait for the PBO? Why not go get those economists, as the Conservative Party has done in the past? Why not do it before the debates, before people start voting, be by mail as they are now, or before the advance votes, which start Friday?
They may well do so. I mean, I don't speak for the campaign or the war room, but it is certainly a concern. I think that is out there. But I also think that, if we're talking about deficits and finances and who's more credible on it, I think that is a very firm, solid ground on which Conservatives are prepared to fight.
All right. So let me go to Kathleen Monk on this and ask you the same question that I asked James. The NDP campaign not costed out at this point, and we are on the cusp of an awful lot of people, an awful lot of Canadians actually going and casting their ballot, and they could potentially do so without the benefit of knowing how much these various promises by certain parties cost. Why do you think there is a delay?
Because I think the process of vetting budgets has fundamentally changed. I think it's really important for viewers to know, and James certainly touched on it a little bit, but really this is only the second election that the Parliamentary Budget Officer has even had the mandate to cost election platform pieces. And that's important last word there, pieces. They don't actually cost the full platform. So sure, the Conservatives or the NDP can smack it all together and tally it up on the calculator, but the Parliamentary Budget Officer is only mandated to cost out certain segments of a platform that parties ask them to do. As James mentioned, years ago when we put together a platform, we'd go out and find some economists and pay them a fee to vet our platforms and crunch the numbers and see if they worked. That practice has largely fallen to the wayside because in the 2019 election, just before the 2019 election, the Liberals, as a part of their 2015 campaign platform, brought forth this idea that the Parliamentary Budget Officer, which existed previously, would now do this kind of costing. It's important for it to be done, but the devil's always in the details because there's negotiation that has to happen. There's timelines. There's consent for release, as you mentioned, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer doesn't do the jigsaw work of making sure that all the pieces actually fit together and are intellectually and mathematically cohesive. They cost individual segments. And so while it's really important work that they do, another independent think tank by the name of the Institute for Studies in Fiscal Democracy does similar work led by former PBO officer Kevin Page. We really have abandoned this former practice of the parties costing and crunching their numbers on their own.
Elliot, let me go to you because the Liberal Party obviously would have known the date of the election, being the one to really kick it off, to initiate it. Does that give the Liberal Party an advantage in that it can get the platform in sooner than the other parties?
I suppose a little bit, but
yeah. Sorry, I thought it was me. Go ahead.
No, not at all. I would agree. I think it does a little bit, but I think all the parties knew that an election was brewing and they could have done their work. The problem with not having a fully costed platform is it questions Erin O'Toole's credibility. He is interviewing right now to be the Prime Minister of Canada, and Canadians are looking at the various options in front of them. If you come to them with a plan, but it's not costed, your credibility goes down, and you lose on leadership. And I think Canadians are particularly now looking for real leadership. If Erin O'Toole had said, look, the fact of the matter is, we don't know what things are going to look like in a couple of years. We are going to give you 2 to 3 years worth of costing. And when we are elected, we will come back to you, Canadians, and tell you the state of the affairs of the books, what the plan is to get back to balance. Now, I know that's a bit unreasonable and unlikely, but the other scenario in which he's saying he's going to eliminate the deficit in 10 years based on 3% growth, which we haven't had in decades, while not cutting anything in the federal government is completely rubbish, complete rubbish.
Yeah.
And so you may take a bit of heat saying, well, you don't really have a long-term plan and so on, but I wonder if you would take less heat than maybe what he's taking now.
James, 10 seconds.
He's not taking any heat, and again, Conservatives are happy to talk about this. The Liberals can have a costed plan, but if Justin Trudeau walks away from it pre-COVID and says he's going to balance the budget in 2 years and runs up the biggest deficits Canada has ever seen, then what value is a costed platform if it means absolutely nothing to you, which is what it means to Justin Trudeau.
Okay, so we're going to have to leave this conversation here.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.